Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, one of your hosts, and with me as always is your sun-drenched host,
Brian. Hi, how's it going?
Good, well bad, soaked with the sun and melted like a candle.
Yeah, it's really warm out. I can't remember who it was. One of the super fangs tweeted us when we were talking about how hot it was in Dublin. We were like, yeah, it's been like 25 degrees, and they were saying, yeah, in Australia it's 25 degrees during the winter, so fuck off. Except they didn't say it.
They were nice about it.
They were very nice about it.
Yeah.
Very pleasant. But in fairness, there's a couple of different aspects there. One is that we do not have air conditioners in Ireland. None of the buildings are designed to have aeration, etc. So being inside when it's warm out is not significantly cooler than being outside. Our houses are built to retain heat.
Also, importantly, we are weak little babies.
Oh, 100%. If you're it's also very humid. But if you're not used to it, it's gross.
How do you do in the sun, Brian?
How do I deal with the sun?
How do you do in the sun?
Not well. I already have the issue of I am deeply allergic to being outside because I get really bad hay fever. Though this has been the first year ever that I feel like I've managed my hay fever to some degree, because I've been using like a nasal spray and that's been really helping. But I've been using it consistently, whereas previously I just kind of used it when I thought it was appropriate. But I've been using it every day, and I'm on a new medication which was previously prescription only and is now over the counter. So I'm very excited about that. And
I still maintain the belief that hay fever is a psychosomatic illness purported by Big Nasal to sell you more sprays.
For sure. I've laid beside you many nights where I could not breathe. So it's really nice to hear that you think that I'm actually just doing it to myself. I'm super pale, so I just burn very easily, and I do not tan in any way. My arms get a bit more freckled when they're out in the sun, but that's about it. You do fine with the sun mostly.
Yes, grand, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, here we are as a nation with our grass going brown.
Yeah, 100%. Buffy
the show, Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah. So this episode is Villains. It's season 6, episode 20. It was first aired on May the 14th, 2002. It was directed by David Solomon, who last directed Hell's Bells, and it was written by Marty Noxon, who last wrote Wrecked. And here's your Buffy on summary. As a dying Buffy is taken to hospital, Willow steals dark magic from the magic shop's books. She saves Buffy and tracks Warren, who decoys her with a robot. Spike arrives in Africa and confronts a demon. Willow tracks Warren into the forest, torments him with Katrina's ghost, tortures him with a bullet, and then, as Buffy arrives too late, flays and burns him. If there's one absolute unified experience that all people who have watched Buffy and have watched this episode specifically have, it is that there's only one word for what Willow does to Warren, which is flaying.
Yeah.
And people love saying it because they're like, that's flaying. Oh, look, he got flayed. And does everyone, there is no more consistent use of the word flay in history than there is about Warren in this episode.
It's like, was it Buffy who kept having catatonia?
Yes. Yeah. For sure. Okay. So let us talk about some bronzy banter.
Yeah, let's go over to the bronze, sit out under a parasol in the sun, have an iced drink. And yeah, I explained a little bit of maybe a dearth for substantial new content. It's very much kind of like ongoing favorites at the moment. So what we did most significantly this week is revisit a couple of cult classic films from many years ago. One of which we've seen before, which is Election, which I want to say is 1998? 99.
Yeah, Reese Witherspoon and Matthew Broderick, classic comedy by the director whose name I can't remember, and I'll find out now. Go.
Yeah, so I think it's Reese Witherspoon's first film, I want to say.
Oh, no.
Okay, pardon me, sorry, an early film for her.
For sure.
She's 22, I think, at the time. And yeah, so Cult Classics in the Criterion Collection is a comedy, and it is
directed by Alexander Payne.
Yeah, probably reasonably not well known these days, I think, but definitely not by anyone I know. And the premise being that Matthew Broderick is a civics teacher in a high school in America. Reese Witherspoon is a young, very driven, very ambitious student running for student body president. And they basically get into, it's kind of presented as like they get into a rivalry with each other, or like a kind of a conflict where he wants to stop her from becoming president for reasons, but the reasons are kind of, in retrospect, she had a like, can you even call it a relationship with like a fellow teacher of his, and that led to the teacher being fired, and therefore for various reasons associated with that, Matthew Broderick kind of doesn't like her because of that.
Well, I think the ultimate thing about the film is that Matthew Broderick is, as like standard in TV and film, plays a likable everyman in almost everything he does. He's always the nice, cute guy who like everyone likes. And in this one, the comedy weaponizes that against you because everything he does is absolutely odious.
Yeah,
and
he's meant to be the lovable teacher, everyone's favorite Mr. M or whatever his name is.
Yeah, and by the end of it, you're like, this man is awful, like just awful.
Yeah, it's actually quite a funny comedy, or a funny kind of situation in that respect, because it is presented in some way that it could be any way like an even competition, but he is kind of just bullying this teenager, but both of them, like, it turns on the fact that Matthew Broderick and Reese Witherspoon just get powerhouse performances in it.
Specifically Reese Witherspoon, her performance is just immaculate.
Yeah, it's genuinely funny, it's breezy, it's worth checking out if you haven't seen it before. Funny enough, there's actually a Matthew Broderick reference in this episode of Buffy as well.
Yeah, an extended one.
Andrew says he prefers Ferris Matthew Broderick because he gets choreograph, he goes to Broadway, which I think is kind of like an interesting through line back to this film. So yeah, go check out Election, quite a good poster as well.
Oh, it's a great poster. They mentioned War Games as well, which I haven't actually seen, but I presume it's good fun. Yeah,
it's very much in that vein of 80s. It's a hacker film, but this is not what hacking looks like in any way, shape or form.
Kind of like Hackers.
Yes, or Swordfish. All things which were not actually representative of hacking. Although we don't actually, I think we still don't know. We wouldn't know hacking if we saw it. It's very boring. It's just people like using servers and stuff. Yeah,
very sweaty men.
Yeah. And then the other thing we watched, a double feature that night, was
we watched it with my sister Aoife and her boyfriend Aoife, who listens to the podcast. She's binged the podcast before. I don't think she's up to date at the moment, but she's a listener. So hi Aoife, how are you getting on? And
we watched Jennifer's Body, which I was very keen to watch, which some of you may remember. It was 2009, marketed as kind of a teen horror comedy with Megan Fox and Amy Seyfried. I say it correctly, Seyfried?
Amanda Seyfried.
Why do I say Amy? Amanda Seyfried. And specifically, I was prompted to revisit it because I heard a few compelling kind of critical reflections on it, where they said Jennifer's Body is a fantastic cult classic horror film. It is a fantastic film in terms of the feminist themes within it, the representation of women. The writing is tight, that there is explicit and meaningful queer content in it, and that it was in many ways overlooked in that respect, because at the time when the film was released, there was a much, and even I would argue, an even much more prevalent culture of objectification of women in the media, and specifically women celebrities, in terms of pitching them against each other, kind of villainizing Britney Spears and Lindsay Lohan and these kind of people, and the much wider, I think at the time, cultural acceptance of things like how you could just like photograph women and celebrities in compromising positions, and that would be like, and share that, and everyone would look at that, and reputable news magazines or newspapers would kind of share that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and like, Perez Hilton be like exemplifying all those things. The fact that Perez Hilton is not like outlawed and in jail is absolute travesty, realistically.
Yeah, and this kind of culture of celebrity sex tapes and all this kind of stuff, and that in any way being, in a very mainstream sense, kind of accepted. So in terms of Jennifer's Body, the contrast which I kind of heard about there was, or thought about, was that it was very much marketed as like Megan Fox, and this is kind of like a quote unquote kind of bimbo teen high school character. She's mad for the boys, and now she's going to eat them, etc. And it was very much marketed at this. The marketing was at this section of kind of teenage boys who wanted to, I suppose, objectify and kind of laugh at this kind of stereotype. And it didn't gel, and it doesn't gel at all with the actual film itself, which on rewatch and now seeing it in 2021 really holds up, and was like definitely hit all those points of like, I don't feel that there's very little in this I think has aged badly. I think if this film came out tomorrow, it would probably be considered fresh and interesting today in many respects. The performances are great. Megan Fox, I think, has great star power and has great comedic timing, which is something I don't think people really expect of her. And yeah, like one of the things about it was that it was kind of like, oh, is it a queer film? You know, is it? And it's like, it is absolutely, there is gay content in this. Like, you're not fishing for subtext here. It's kind of what the film is about. Her weaponizing her own objectification and kind of, you know, the relationship between the two girls and it being like the real defining factor. It has shared DNA with Fear Street in that way.
Yeah, for sure. It was an unusual one because it was written by Diablo Cody, who wrote Juno, and won awards for Juno, and who has like that like kind of ear for dialogue, which is just, you know, I think Juno really didn't really reflect how people talked at the time, but it did determine how people talked afterwards. And I think Juno's also just like, I still really like Juno, even though it's often misinterpreted as a anti-choice film. But you can really see that in this movie. Like, the dialogue throughout is kind of like sparkling and like effervescent and stupid and funny and genuine. So what I was surprised by the film was that it actually had like quite a lot of very interesting references in it. So the amount of Carrie references throughout was fascinating. Like, you had your kind of classic Brian De Palma split diopter shots, which I've got banged on about a bunch before. Who directed Carrie, specifically the 1976 Oscar-winning masterpiece, honestly. Like, if you haven't watched Carrie recently, go watch it. It's stunning. Sissy Spacek is incredible in it. Piper Laurie, also incredible.
Manhunter is a Brian De Palma as well.
No, that's starring, it's Brian Cox, but it's directed by Michael Mann.
Okay, my mistake, sorry.
I believe. I'll have to check that out afterwards. But Brian De Palma mostly did kind of cult classics besides Carrie. But like, I mean, just things like, you know, the even like the house that they're inhabiting is very, or that Amanda Seyfried's character is in, is very very similar to Carrie's house, and her mother is quite religious, and there's like visually like lots of like references like that. And it's an odd one because it's very much like an inversion of that, because in Carrie, obviously the very innocent virginal and religious girl is the one who is possessed or empowered, and in this movie it's obviously the girl who is non-virginal, who is sexually active and also like sexually liberal and liberated, is the one who's empowered. And just an interesting one because it really does flip it on its head, and it was just smart and engaging, and it was fun to watch. It was funny. It was genuinely funny and camp, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of evangelized as like, this is one I would probably put in my canon, and I think if one of these things that if you enjoy Buffy, you might enjoy this as well. We worth revisiting, and it's fun. So speaking of queer women revenge killing men, we have this very notable and very memorable episode of Buffy, where Dark Willow makes her first appearance. So yeah, I found this a roller coaster.
Yeah, it was great.
I was tense. My heart was pounding. I was like, I'm actually, like, I've seen this before and I know this so well, but I felt like threat. I felt threat level throughout this. Yeah, no, this episode is definitely, it's a great action episode of Buffy. And it's also like very interesting because it's like, it's very threatening because it's so, it's such a break from the what we've experienced before with Buffy. Like with seasons 1 through 5, for the season finale and the run up to the season finale, you know, you might have situations where, like in season 4, the gang is kind of split up a little bit and they have to come back together to work together to win. In this, it's very splintered. You know, one of their own is dead now, Tara. Willow it's so weird seeing them kind of like in a car with Dark Willow because they're not really aware what's gone on, and they're not aware that this is like beyond her, you know, it's no longer the same entity in some ways. And you also have things like, you know, like Giles isn't here, the supporting cast feels like it's just been cut away. So when you see Buffy and Xander being the two
Scoobies who are active. It's just really like sad and scary and alone, and it's really effective.
Yeah, it really feels like all of the script of and I think that's what we build to really with the end of the episode, is that nothing's kind of off the table in some ways, you know. And yeah, the fact that Anya is kind of divorced from the cast, and there's even from the Scoobies, and there's even a question when they do kind of interact with Anya, and when Anya helps them, like, what side are you on? You know? So there's a real sense of exposure and a real sense of, particularly at the start of the episode, where like Buffy is being shot, like and Xander is just there. It's like there is no one steering this ship at the moment. You know,
100%.
Yeah, and I thought that the it conveyed, it was a thrilling episode in many ways, and it really had such a like a lot of the best episodes of Buffy. It had a really clear central motivating pressure throughout the whole thing, which is Willow pursuing Warren. There was nothing else going on, really, you know. And what it would mean when she finds him, and also just what I thought was really really fascinating to watch in detail was Warren's consistent characterization throughout the episode. Do you know what I mean? Like, there is a persistence of that mentality in men like that and people like that even right up until the last moment, he doesn't understand really how much danger he's in, because he thinks people like him eventually win, you know, because he's inherently better than women. And that is kind of right up, like, she is so much more powerful than him. He is in such a compromised position. He still can't, he has nothing else in him other than this, like, nastiness. You know, it's really, it's an interesting commitment to that, I think, yeah.
For sure. And he also just reads is so pathetic in this episode. You know, when he goes to get help from, what's his name again? Rook?
Rack.
From Rack. And he's kind of like, or when he finds that the Buffy is like not dead, he's scrambling and he just seems so like desperate and pathetic and lowly. And it was interesting. One of the things I found very interesting, like reading around this episode, is apparently like when this episode originally came out, a lot of people had like discussions about whether or not Willow was like culpable in this episode, or like morally culpable over what she does. So like, I mean, people kind of said that like when she, so obviously what she does is she first calls on Osiris to bring Tara back, and he won't, because Tara was killed through mortal means, or kind of like human
death by human means. Yeah.
Exactly. And she like punishes Osiris by shouting at him, like, I mean, and it actually seems to hurt him, which is like a real scary, like, oh, there's some god-like thing that you're calling on to, like, that was able to, had the power to bring Buffy back, and you're hurting it through your rage. And when she like, I mean, it's fascinating, because when she then goes to the magic shop, like, you know, she is at that point still entirely cogent, and, you know, just completely ignores Anya and takes all of the evil magic basically through the books into her, and becomes Dark Willow essentially in that moment. And people have suggested that magic that she consumes is like similar to a drug, so she's no longer kind of like culpable for what she does. I don't think the drug metaphor is very useful here at this point. I think it's the magic has shifted again to be a completely different metaphorical role, which is rage and anger and like loss. And I would personally think that, like, no, Willow's like, I think that's people trying to read this in a way that doesn't make their fave Willow bad.
Yeah.
But no, I think Willow, like, is entirely present. I think she has taken this onto herself, and she is very much culpable for the fact that in this moment, what she thinks she is best to do is to, you know, remove man's skin after torturing him.
Yeah. And like, there's all arguments you can make about how people are less culpable or emotionally compromised when they're experiencing grief and trauma and tragedy and all that kind of stuff, but there's a very clearly defined set of circumstances in the Buffy universe where it's not your fault, and this isn't one of them. Yeah. But yeah, I think it's interesting what you say about the metaphor changing again, because we've had this metaphor before of the magic being
first lesbianism.
Yeah, kind of like lesbianism, specifically lesbianism, really, because there's like this queerness infused with this femininity, and that's very significant.
And affection and sensitivity and sexuality and sensuality.
Yeah, and if we take that metaphor through, and obviously her girlfriend's being killed, she's now taking that kind of tender like lesbian energy and making it really sharp and killing people with it. It's not what elevates Buffy as a show in this respect is Willow's magic is not an incidental power that she has selected from a list. Like, it's all tied together specifically with Tara's death. It's so intimately tied to the magic and so intimately tied to why they lost so much time together anyway. I think I wrote down one of my notes I took was like, has there ever been anyone in the Buffy universe who is like Willow, who is as powerful as Willow in some respects? Because her consistent thing between restoring Angel's soul, but this breaking the Slayer line eventually, is she destabilizes and arguably like queers the rules of the Buffy universe. She walks out of frame and off the page and does things which are not meant to be able to be done. As he said, she's now between Glory and Osiris has on multiple occasions like harmed gods.
And well, I think if no one really in Buffy on that level is on that level, but I think in Angel they're definitely. I think Angel has a real like issue with power shift.
Power creep.
Where like, Cordelia in that is just like, at some point you're kind of like, oh, Cordelia can just do anything, and it's like, oh, okay, well,
it's actually something that was noted when I was kind of reading my Angel recently, is that very rarely on Buffy are there half demons, hybrids, or higher beings of any description, and they're in almost every episode of Angel.
Yeah, so true. One of the things that I found very interesting is we asked people to tweet at us last week about our episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is this podcast which you were listening to. We got a couple of interesting responses just around.
Nope.
What?
This is Buffy Boys.
Oh, Buffy Boys, that's one. We got some great responses. Laura lol 85 pointed out that our ratings have been absolutely wild for season 6, which is totally accurate. But also notes that, like, as we kind of highlighted, that seeing red is a very it's a very divisive episode, because while it is in no way enjoyable, that doesn't stop it from being actually quite an articulate piece of media, while having missteps and being quite divisive. Damsel at BB Bell tweeted asking us, like, did Tara have to die? Was that necessitated by this by the episode? Like, did the show need a sacrificial lamb to motivate Willow? Which is a great thought as well. And Elizabeth at Shiny Red Ukulele, who is tweets us all the time, which we super appreciate, constantly with very insightful stuff, to be honest, but pointed out very appropriately, like, that everything about this really does write over Tara's existence and really denigrates her as a character because like after this, like, Willow doesn't handle anything about Tara feels very much written out of the narrative after this point. And there's no ability for Willow to atone for what she's done to Tara during this season, in terms of just the like quite abusive actions she exhibited towards her. Yeah,
there's an argument to be made there, which I think Elizabeth kind of quite astutely highlighted, that there's an element that Tara is entitled to a certain, like, discussion of how she was treated, and that's an important part of her life. The fact that she was like memory wiped in this way, and I suppose part of the death and part of the thing that death brings is you do get these sudden like unresolved things that aren't even like neatly or poetically unresolved, just like in the middle of a sentence things stop.
Exactly. I mean, like, but yeah, Tara's representation here is like, it's an important one. It's part of why like in season 7 there's no significant mention of Tara. There's no significant mention of Buffy's rape, really. It really does like kind of fall away. Anyway, it's an interesting one.
Even in this episode, Sandra refers to Spike as Mr. Attempted Rape, which I think is even more explicit, more specific than really the show kind of carries on with.
I find that very odd and very interesting because I thought it was like actually like a bit further than Seeing Red as an episode was willing to go in terms of like actually putting a label on it. I don't think they really put a label on it significantly afterwards.
It's such a messy thing because like Dawn wants to stay with Spike because she feels safer there, which arguably she has every reason to feel, and Buffy's like, okay, yes, because like on balance, like it's kind of the best thing to do, and he's like, is that safe? And she's like, we can't actually do anything, but also he wouldn't because it's a different thing, and like that's kind of true, but it's so messy.
I found it a very mature response from Buffy in the sense that she put aside her like deep trauma in this moment and extreme pain to say, well, it's not as important as Dawn's safety. And like she's right. Like I think, you know, the portrayal of Spike really holds that, like if in this situation Buffy came to him after that happened and said, you need to take care of Dawn and protect her with your life, we've seen before he will actually protect her with his life or death or whatever. Speaking of Dawn, like Dawn in this episode, like Jesus fucking Christ,
the girl cannot catch a break.
I think Dawn's most annoying season is inarguably season 7. In season 7, she's a pain in the ass. Like, you know, when she thinks she's going to be the Slayer or she's going to be a potential, and then she finds out she's not. Like, hilarious. But
like such a jip though, like being screwed out. Like you're the Slayer's sister, you don't get to be the Slayer.
Yeah, because someone was behind a door and they like. Do you remember this, Kate? That like, you know, it's the tall girl. With the long straight hair ends up being a potential, and it's because like there's like supposed to be like a spell that they use to find the potential, and it goes straight into Dawn, and they're like, oh, Dawn is it, and it turns out that the girl was standing behind the door.
It's so cruel.
It's really stupid. Anyway, but like I mean, at this point, like never mind in season 5 in which her mother died, she found out that she wasn't real, she had a self-harming problem, and then was attempted to be sacrificed and had her sister die. In this season, her sister being brought back to life. She has, you know, experienced like extreme difficulties in school. Her school, a boy she fancied, she had to kill. All this stuff, and now at this point, she has to come home where no one has thought about her in this episode. To this point, she comes home. In fairness, like, you know, she wouldn't be your first thought. You know, I think it's reasonable that you're like,
there's tremendous pressures on focus in this episode.
Yeah, Buffy hasn't like missed, like she hasn't misstepped here, but Dawn walks in and finds Tara's body. Like, you know, Tara, who has been a genuine source of comfort and support and affection for Dawn, and they really made a point of that.
An important thing to point out is that Willow actually keeps from everyone that Tara is dead for quite a lot of the episode. So I think if Xander and Buffy were like, and there's a dead body in the house, they might have reorganized their priorities a bit.
I think Buffy would have like made sure that Dawn didn't wander into a dead body.
But then Dawn wakes with Tara for like hours.
The phrase she uses, I didn't know the phrase. But like Dawn says, like, no, I didn't want her to be alone. There was which is just traumatizing. It was a very interesting interaction actually, because Buffy like walks in and sees Tara's body and just like utters like a very, very deeply sad, oh God, which is just like, there's, you know, this is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the most fast talking, quippiest show around, except for Gilmore Girls, and our heroine being like, as we've constantly noted, when our heroine has length. You know what? I always feel bad using the word heroine, because I think, you know, using female versions of words can be a real like crappy thing to do, if you get me, because I think that like, you know, like actresses. I don't like using the phrase actresses. You're all actors, and there's no need to denote that, like, you know, women are a different category, you know. In some ways, I'm okay with heroine, because I think it's a better thing. I think it's a good thing to denote really specifically. Anyway,
it's a good way to be like, this is the kind of thing you will like, but it has a great heroine specifically.
Yeah. Anyway, our heroine is removed of the ability to speak in a moment of and then very quickly regains it, because when she realizes Dawn's there, she reverts to her most, I would say, the most comforting motherly representation that Sarah Michelle Gellar ever gives Buffy, because she says, like, I think she says, come on, sweetie, we have to go, you know, we have to get you somewhere safe, and you don't need to be here anymore, and I'm so sorry, basically.
Buffy, who is a 21-year-old woman who has been shot to death today.
Yeah. Actually, did you think that was a shooting to death? I've seen like, so when Buffy has been shot and she's on the operating table, Dark Willow comes along while they're operating on her, and basically walks into the room, starts all the medical equipment going haywire, and then removes the bullet from Buffy, and Buffy wakes up and is alive again. And the suggestion is that Willow, it's kind of unclear if Willow wanted to save Buffy or if she wanted to use Buffy to reap revenge, essentially.
Yeah, no, I think I have a couple of thoughts on that. One is, I think she flatlines from a medical perspective.
Do you think so? Because, like, you know...
or do I think the equipment was just interfered with?
Yeah, or like as in like the equipment no longer works because Willow is messing with the energy. Because like when she walks into the magic box as well, all the bulbs start exploding around her. And
yeah, no, I agree it's ambiguous, but I also don't think the flatline means that she's dead, in the sense like...
100%.
You know what I mean? Like, I think her blood pressure was dropping and she's about to die, and Cassandra says she's about to die. I don't think it would have necessarily triggered another Slayer if she was still in the line of succession. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I 100% don't think so either, but like I think it was ambiguous whether it was like a situation where Willow's presence potentially, if she hadn't intervened earlier, would have actually, like, she would have died. Like, you know, I don't know if that, like, you know, the medical team stepping away for a second led to the like kind of like flatlining. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think in terms of why she was there, I think there's a progression for Dark Willow, which we don't always appreciate over this arc, is in that I think she's like, as you say, she's in the back of the car with Xander and Buffy initially. I think she is there to help Buffy, and she's very much like, oh no, I'm going to save Buffy. I'm going to kill Warren. I'm going to kill everyone. But it's like she still thinks she is taking extreme measures to do what the team needs initially, and then as they get in her way, she gets more and more kind of separated from that. But I do think she kind of goes. It's like everything. She makes certain choices which make the next choices easier to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Up until a point where she goes over a ledge that's very difficult to come back from.
I must say the scene in the magic box where she pulls in all the books in like a couple of moments of absolutely excellent CGI for the time. She gets all the books down, ignores Anya, and Anya's being very like responsible and very like adult in this moment. I find that I always respected about Anya, because it's something that Xander doesn't really quite manage to do in moments like this. He tends to really like either like, you know, brick it or kind of like become quite like sour. But Anya's like, no, we can't do this. And Willow then like absorbs all the books. It's such a spine-tinglingly like dramatic and brilliant moment of her taking all that dark magic into herself. And if you haven't seen it recently, there's this incredible graphic where all the words from these pages and a pentagram like climb up her body through her skin, like tattoos moving up and up, and like dyes all her hair black. It's stunning. It's great.
Yeah. I think there's a quality that Anya has which I've really appreciated, which is they do maintain the fact that she is not just another one of the team. She is a former and at times current demon, and she's been around for a very long time. She's seeing other old ones being risen. She's seeing apocalypses. She is not quite like them, and she is part of the demonic ecosystem. So even in this episode, I think it's really fascinating the way she's like, oh, I can tell where Willow is because I'm a vengeance demon and she is seeking vengeance, but I know through my craft that she doesn't want me there. I usually would have to go, but she wants to do it herself. And this concept of Willow has now become part of that demonic ecosystem, that she's a player, a big player on the field in a way that Anya understands from like a professional level that Xander wouldn't, you know. So I do think that I think that looking at Anya so far in the show, she's actually introduced something very valuable both thematically and narratively into the team, which I didn't always realize was necessary. Yeah.
The other big thing to talk about in this episode is that Buffy and Xander and Dawn have a conversation where they kind of say like Willow is intending to kill Warren and we have to stop her. Dawn says we shouldn't have to stop her. She should kill him. And Xander kind of agrees, saying out of the mouth of babes. And Buffy says, no, we don't kill humans. We hand humans over to the law and we let them do with them what they will. And like, you know, every so often, like we've talked about like this over the time where like there hasn't been a huge distinction between humans and non-humans when it comes to killing. Ultimately, like, you know, your coach getting thrown to the sharks, the rage boy who isn't a monster, he's like someone who's been infected by the Hellmouth but is a human otherwise. Where like grieving humans in that situation,
people who could be brought back, essentially, you know, they could be just made human potentially or imprisoned, you know?
Or the hyena pit guy who they basically just like throw into the hyenas.
Earlier times, I think. Morally,
I think ultimately though, I think Buffy is communicating a very important point about the show and an important point about herself, which is that like being above revenge and above emotive justice is a very important moral point for her and a very important moral point for the series, and it's probably like a reasonably morally objectivist view, i.e. that there's a certain good thing and that has to be maintained no matter what. So like, if you take your trolley problem, Buffy's basically saying in this moment that we can't change the trolley where it's going, even if it is a like morally better to save these people, because you would be actively killing someone. And I think it's a very important part of Buffy's character identity and what she communicates, which is that there is a goodness and that she's fighting for it, and that sometimes to do that goodness she has to sink below that, but she doesn't want to, and she wants to be of a goodness,
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I think it's something that the show has tried to be very clear on, and which I think we would argue Angel is not as committed to kind of dealing with the morals of, is that in this empowered world, it doesn't, and because there are some shortcuts logistically and physically to certain things, it doesn't remove the burden of like being alive, essentially. And this season really drills down into that. And I saw it quoted somewhere in some interview that the big bag of season 6 is like life and like trying to like live your life, because I'm gonna keep going.
A baby just walked past the window and waved in.
Yeah, we're really showing our filth right out into the street here.
Yeah, we should be ashamed.
Time and time again on the show, we come into situations where it's like, oh, Spike doesn't have a soul, so therefore he shouldn't feel anything for Buffy, but he does. Angel has a soul and has to deal with the repercussions of that, and the easy answer would be to remove his soul, but he doesn't want to do that. There's Willow's whole addiction thing is about how sometimes just because it's quicker to measure yourself somewhere, there's a reason to do things slower at times, and so on and so forth. And like the killing humans thing, I think is the most objective or the clearest example of that, which is like, it would be a lot of these people, like insofar as a demon or a vampire deserves to die just on numbers, like Warren deserves to die in that respect, in that kind of militaristic respect, but it's not the right thing to do as far as Buffy's concerned, and she has to, if she doesn't have that, I think particularly at a time where she is so concerned over whether she's human or still human, what is the difference between that, and that's kind of where she's staking her flag. And I don't think the show necessarily says that she's right in the sense of like objectively, universally, this is true, but it is her truth, and she is very consistent about that. Yep,
it's an odd one, and it's interesting, and it's very scary.
But that being said, I didn't feel sorry for Warren.
No, of course not.
I think the first time I saw this, I didn't feel sorry for him, but I definitely felt that, because this is an episode I distinctly remember, because as I mentioned before, I was an absolute wimp when it came to any of this kind of stuff, overactive imagination, read the Wikipedia page, have nightmares for weeks, and I very viscerally was able to put myself in his shoes of being like trapped with this very powerful person who is going to kill me, and that was terrifying. So I felt some sympathy for that, you know. But looking back on this now, it's like he's just like literally the first thing he does. Even if it was like, I've done this terrible thing, or I had this like complete murderous moment, and if he was freaked out about it, but he dresses up in a bag suit and goes to brag about it, and then tries to find ways to like score points, and even going insofar as like to when he gets in, and everyone he asks to help him along the way, he is rude to. And then even getting into the forest scene when she tracks him down, fascinating just interaction where he is just, as I said, simultaneously trying to talk his way out of it, but also not able to avoid being a misogynist, or not willing to be. And the fact that Willow realizes the Tara wasn't the first woman he's killed, and he's even calling Katrina's ghost a bitch. You know, it's like, that is such rich characterization, because it's like, he's not a monstrous mass murderer. He is just bad enough as a person to be like, for there to be a real thing between him and Willow in terms of this murder. It's murdering a single person in revenge. It's so focused, and I think that's really fascinating.
He's the first big bad, or big bad equivalent, or you know, I would say he's a big bad from the season.
I would say, to be fair, he's a big bad who is displaced as opposed to being a little bad. Yeah,
I think so too. He's the only big bad who doesn't respect Buffy's power and who thinks that he is better than Buffy
intrinsically. Yeah.
And he thinks it's purely because he's a man. And every other one of them thinks that they're better than Buffy for sure. Like Laurie thinks she's better than Buffy. Adam does. The mayor certainly does. And so does so does Angelus and the Master. All of them think they're better than Buffy. None of them look down on her for being a woman. The Master says kind of some misogynistic things of belittling things.
I see her as a child because she's immortal rather than necessarily being a gender thing.
And Angelus definitely weaponizes her vulnerability.
Angelus
definitely weaponizes her vulnerability against her in terms of saying making fun of her for having sex with him essentially. And obviously the mayor has a certain level of kind of old-fashioned misogyny of seeing women as being...
It's paternalistic, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. But Warren is the only one who thinks he is better than Buffy because for the one and only reason that he's a man, and that is enough to be just an odious, hateable character.
Yeah, and it's really intriguing because all of the other big bags at least see her as being in the same league as them, but at the bottom of the league, that she's a contender, and they don't respect her as a challenger. But Warren, the joke of it and the kicker of it is that he is maybe one of the single most incapable people in the entire universe of the show. And she is demonstrably so capable, and yet he thinks that his gender is enough to elevate it. And it's a tale as old as time, do you know what I mean? But it creates a really, and we've seen how Willow has objectively done bad things to Tara, and that this magic thing is a bad route to go down. But there is something I think intoxicating or intriguing for the audience about being just fucking kill him. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And that's a weird emotion. And it's not the only emotion you have. And then obviously the way she kills him is so intense that as the audience you're shocked, and as Xander and Buffy are shocked, and it's but it's watchable TV.
Yeah, it is. The actual horror of the episode is quite interesting because obviously you have the initial just horror of seeing Tara's death, and then further on the Buffy on the slab kind of stuff, and then the moment where Buffy finds Dawn, just sitting cradling herself near the body, that's very much a horror image. But specifically the Warren robot who has been sent across the country, Warren trying to divert Willow from finding him, who she squeezes his eye out. It's quite scary and quite horrific. But then obviously just the moment of where Willow tortures Warren first by driving the bullet very slowly through his
Terrifying.
Body. Very scary. She sews his mouth closed in a very Billy... what's his name again? Billy...
Oh, you know this.
I don't.
Billy from Hocus Pocus, anyway.
Yeah, Billy.
Which is a film that actually was released, I think it was 20 odd years ago, but it was today.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, so today's a Hocus Pocus. I know,
really?
I know, it's bizarre.
Oh God, I'll figure it out. Billy something. Anyway, and then sewing his mouth closed very viscerally, and they show a lot of close-ups of Warren's face, and it's very he's very, very panicked and very desperate. And then finally Willow, using maybe the most well-known phrase from all of Buffy, where she says bored now, and just removes his skin and leaving a momentarily suspended body, in the sense that there's a second after she removes his skin where before he crumples dead, where you have to imagine there was a couple of moments of life before dying from having all of his skin torn away from his body and just exposing all his muscular system. It is gruesome, fascinating, ridiculous, and one of this show's brilliant visual moments.
Yeah, and is it I struggle to think of any other moment in the show that is as violent as it. Just straight up Hannibal level violence. Yeah. And I think it's good that once it goes there, it never goes there again. But it is a moment of absolute excess. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to the dusting. So a couple of Buffy bits there for you, Joe. One of the songs that plays in this episode, I think it's during the bar scene, is Die Die My Darling, which is by the Misfits. The Misfits are a band who people love to wear t-shirts with their logo on it. Very few people actually like to listen to their albums because their albums are usually reasonably bad. The paramedics in the episode who come to take Buffy away apparently are the same paramedics as in the body, which I find surprising, and I'm not 100% sure about that. It's just one of the trivia notes I found online, so I'm going to do a bit of research into that because I'm not 100% certain. But then again, the paramedics in the body, you don't really see them at any point, so I wouldn't be too surprised. We have to question, how did Spike get to Africa in the space of like 6 hours?
Yeah, I think the reason why it's there is there's some editing for dramatic effect, you know?
Yeah, it's not they're not parallel actions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's just being spliced in, but he could just teleport there as well.
Yeah.
I can't imagine he got on a plane.
Yeah, no, it's so awkward. Like, I mean, what do you do if the person beside you opens up the window? Yeah, and that's kind of, the only other thing I have is like, you know, what the fuck is liver reversed? Presumably just like a liver sausage. Sounds
yeah, I'm
awful.
pretty certain. I'm pretty sure I've eaten one of those in Bavaria before. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Do you have any Buffy bits, Joe?
Yeah, so I felt that I think it's reasonably likely that in the forest when she ties him up with the vines, that's probably an Evil Dead reference.
Oh, I'd imagine so too. I have that in my notes as well.
Yeah, very visceral. Evil Dead scene set in the forest. I thought it was retrospectively funny as well that when she's torturing Warren with the bullet, she says, you know, it's not like in your comics, like it's not a clean hole, etc. You know, it's a small clean hole. Because one of the real, I think, bum notes of the comics amongst many things is that Warren is still alive.
Yeah, he's kept alive by Amy.
Teleporting out, and there's just like a lot of jokes about him being meat and him kind of running around being a meat boy, and it's like it kind of runs so counter, but like I thought, you know, it's funny that he ends up being a comic book character for me. And then, yeah, we also have obviously Clem in this episode as well, so we kind of have the kind of continuation of that kind of good demon arc stuff, which I think is really interesting, you know, and really again problematized, like if you have good demons and evil humans, like what does that mean in terms of what the show is trying to do. And then, yeah, I suppose I just want for a Buffy Bits point perspective, just highlight that we rag on the CGI of this 20-year-old show plenty, but like this episode's really good on that respect. I think they do a lot of things. They have like a flying snitch bomb that Warren uses. He traps her inside a blob. There is the aforementioned kind of
magic books and the taking the stuff onto herself. Yeah. So
there's a few different things like that, and I think they pull it off quite like it didn't pull me out of the moment. Yeah.
Cool. And do you have any fashion notes, Joe?
Yeah, I think an obvious fashion highlight here has to be Dark Willow's whole look,
whole shtick. Yeah. Her
whole
evil sorceress wardrobe, yeah,
Hot Topic extreme kind of, yeah. It looks cool, yeah.
It does.
It's a classic thing.
It's definitely hot, like.
Yeah, 100%. And otherwise, it's actually weird from a fashion perspective because they're wearing exactly the same clothes they were in the last episode, and presumably they will be wearing the same clothes for the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's true. We did note that Spike looked incredibly awkward just walking around in a black black turtleneck in Africa. Yeah,
without his duster. He kind of looks like if you were, you know, like when a cat or a dog has their head shaved for the vet or something. He's just like, he's missing a really fundamental part of, or this horrifying Twitter feed I found recently, which is called Peeled Pokemon. And it's Pokemon where you take their, like, they don't have their ears anymore or whatever, and it's like they look really upsetting. It's like, it kind of made me think of that.
A death count, I think I could probably fill this in for us. So it's Warren Robot gets killed, and so does Warren Mears, flayed alive by Dark Willow.
Flayed and burned. The burning we always forget.
Yes, yeah. I think it's a good idea because it's just like, and now let's get rid of it.
Yeah, let's remove that plot point.
Yeah. Okay. And a rating? Do you have a rating, Joe?
Yeah, so I was thinking like 11 out of 10. I was thinking no, I have to go higher than last week because this is a better episode, I think. Okay. But I want to leave some room there, so I'll probably say maybe a 9.3 for me.
Okay.
9.3 Warring Skins. I'll go for the obvious one. because I think the next few episodes, like this whole thing kind of runs together as like a solid arc.
I think the last episode is maybe a little, like, I think like Two to Go is also quite interesting. I think this is probably going to be the highlight of that arc.
Yeah, it doesn't. I think people often feel that the finale doesn't quite stick the landing and quite as well as it could have. But yeah, it is an arc there. And I just think this whole thing is great. I think, you know, season 6 for many reasons has not as high a reputation amongst fans as some of the earlier seasons. The earlier seasons, I think we've made the argument before, are kind of a different show, or like a tonally or thematically different show. But like, having really kind of opened myself up to the not the sitcom, but the soap opera elements, the family drama elements of this season, it's like, yeah, this is a complicated situation. The Willow stuff is paid off. It's been earned. And, you know, watching this, I felt anxiety and apprehension as if I'd never seen it before, because I was like, God, what's going to happen when she finds him? Do you know what I mean? Like, so like, it's good. It stands up, I think.
Yeah, I would probably give it a 9.0 wet lung sounds out of 10. I agree with you on all that. It's all very exciting and scary, and I think that this episode is more straightforwardly enjoyable than the last episode, even though you do have like such a violent thing happening.
If I could choose between Tara or Warren dying, I'd rather watch Warren dying, I think.
But also there's a real threat feeling to the episode, and I remember a couple of times I've seen like Buffy writers in retrospect say, like, you know, season 6 had these problems. Like, if you look at it, what were we thinking? We made Willow the bad guy. What were we thinking? I think Willow's great. I think Dark Willow is terrifying. I think it's good writing. I think it's fascinating. I think it's incredible that you take that character in season 1 and you bring her to this point in a natural progression. Obviously barring the drug stuff in the season, which is awkward as fuck. But I think this has been written into the character from a very early point in a very interesting way, and I think this really works. So I think it's a great payoff for Willow's arc, and I think after this point, you know, everything kind of like changes, which is great. Yeah. Okay. Should we go for the Cordelia chase there, Joe?
Yeah, let's do it. So this episode was A New World.
And again, like the Buffy episode follows immediately on after the previous episode.
Yeah, it does. That's true. So this was an interesting episode of Angel for me, because this is one that I've often, in retrospect, kind of rated quite poorly, because it's like it kind of introduces the Connor stuff, but it's kind of hokey, and Connor does kind of like a poor job, and there's a lot of like outdoor shooting and all this kind of stuff that just isn't real well handled, and kind of has these like awkward teenage years feeling to the whole thing. And actually, I think it was much more enjoyable on this time around than I expected. So you have Connor appears through the portal. There's an initial fight scene with Angel. He escapes into Los Angeles, and then because he's never been to a human world before, he runs, you know, it's one of the situations where he runs into saves a girl from a drug dealer. She takes him to their
to her like drug den,
and he, you know, has some human moments with her, but then she ends up
apparently she's a reference to the character Sunny in The Catcher in the Rye, you were saying.
Yes, so there's also a character called Sunny in The Catcher in the Rye. I can't remember the name of this like seminal piece of fiction for a second. Who also travels with or interacts with Holden while he's like out learning about the world.
She's a young sex worker in Catcher in the Rye.
And then them trying to find Connor and trying to deal with this new situation. So I would say that the one part that I think doesn't hold up well specifically, or isn't necessarily written well in retrospect, is again all the gritty drug stuff, where it's like you know that thing on TV where the drug dealers and the situations, they feel like they are either scenes from West Side Story or just like written by someone who has heard about this kind of like situation on the news, you know. So it feels very pantomimey and very like at times kind of like falsely gritty, but like that is kind of the era of this TV as well, and it's also not the genre for it to be. If anything, it's like they wandered into a situation where she is injecting herself and also using a spoon to like heat up the heroin or whatever it is. And it's like that doesn't need to be an Angel, yeah. But the rest of it was reasonably well, worked reasonably well for me. I think they did a few, something which I was saying to you, Brian, that we overlook about Connor as a character is he is meant to be very powerful. Significantly not just like a teenage demon hunter whiny kid, but he's meant to have all the promise. He's a promised one, essentially. He's all the promise of like being born a living vampire of two of the greatest vampires in history, you know. So they do some slow motion fighting, which is a little dated because it's the early 2000s.
It's not awful though.
It's not awful, and it's like very much like he can take on Angel and the entire team by himself.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think that was quite enjoyable. It's actually a decent arc for Connor in the episode, and I think
the episode you have him seeing Holtz, a very aged, very damaged Holtz, who walks out of the shadows.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like he gets some reconciliation with Angel, who tries to like does his best to be like, I missed so much of your life, but I'm here to help you, and I will take a shotgun blast for you. And then sets up this thing where by the end of the season, Holtz will kind of have the final betrayal against Angel, you know. And then the completely random character in the middle where it's like this like purple haired lady who is an expert in dimensional magic. So
I liked her. I'd watch that TV show.
Yeah, I was trying to look up if she's done anything else, because she's such a fully formed like Whedon-esque character, and she keeps like teleporting around the room randomly because she's like not fully in this plane, but she's like a full character that was there. And yeah, just like a lot of, it was actually again thematically similar to the Buffy episode, because a lot of conversation about like a crisis has suddenly erupted out of nowhere that wasn't built to in many ways. And in the moment, everyone's saying, what is the right thing to do? You know, here, how do we deal? Should we kill him if we have to? You know, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I enjoy it. I think again, I would continue and give it maybe 7 feminist gestures.
Yeah, I'd say like a reasonably like strong 7. The grittiness like makes that impossible to bring it anything above that.
Yeah, so I think that's everything for this week.
Great.
Exciting time in Buffy land. If you enjoyed this episode, please do let us know. Tell your friends, tell the skinned buggies in your life.
Okay, yeah, why not?
I can't think of anything else except that scene. I just keep picturing it.
Yeah.
Tell the skinned buggies in your life. And we will see all you super fans here next week for another exciting episode of
Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys, Buffy Boys, Buffy Boys.
Bye.
See ya.